On a stifling night in the countryside, a routine patrol is interrupted by an eerie silence that hides more than it seems. Guided by the dog's instinct, an officer finds a dirty and silent little girl, pushing a heavy cart all by herself. What seemed like an ordinary rescue reveals traces of a dark past and a hidden network of disappearances. Now, amid threats and shadowy clues, they move forward together in search of a truth that could change everything. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you are watching us from. We continue. Charleston slept under a starless sky that summer Thursday. The heat clung to the skin like a second layer, thick and suffocating, one of those nights when even the air seemed to ask for permission to circulate. In the streets far from the city center, where the light from the lampposts fought against the darkness of the alleys, the silence was broken only by the distant bark of a dog and the muffled roar of engines cutting through the dead of night. Henry drove the patrol car with the calm of someone who knew every corner of that city. Nearly 10 years in uniform had molded in him a watchful eye, trained to notice what most people ignored. His hands were firm on the wheel, his body relaxed in the seat, but his mind was always alert. Beside him, or rather, in the back seat protected by a metal grate, Apollo maintained an erect posture, his snout pressed to the window, his brown eyes scanning the world outside with an intensity that only police dogs possess. Apollo was no ordinary dog. A Belgian Malinois with short, golden fur, muscular and agile. He had been trained since he was a puppy, for search and rescue, scent detection and protection missions. Henry had known him for 5 years, ever since the animal had arrived at the precinct as a youth, full of energy and determination. Since then, they had worked together on dozens of operations. Apollo never failed. His instinct was unerring, almost supernatural. When something was wrong, he knew. And when he knew, he gave a sign. That was exactly what happened that night. Henry had just driven down a wide avenue, nearly empty at this hour, when he felt a sudden movement in the back seat. Apollo stood up, his front paws resting on the divider, his body as tense as a drawn bowstring. His snout pressed against the glass, sniffing insistently, his eyes fixed on a side street that opened to the right, poorly lit by a rusty lamppost that flickered erratically. Henry glanced in the rearview mirror and met the dog's gaze. He knew that behavior. Apollo didn't bark for no reason, nor did he get agitated without cause. When something caught his attention like that, there was a reason to investigate. He slowed down, turned on his signal, and turned into the narrow street. The surrounding buildings were modest, small houses with iron gates, peeling walls, and uneven sidewalks. Everything seemed normal, but Apollo remained restless, now scratching lightly at the divider, a low whine escaping his throat. Henry stopped the patrol car and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was almost oppressive. He got out of the car, opened the back door, and clipped the short leash to Apollo's collar. As soon as his paws touched the ground, the dog pulled hard, guiding Henry toward a side alley, where stacked cardboard boxes formed a sort of makeshift barricade. That's when he saw it, a small hunched figure, pushing an old unbalanced cart filled with cardboard tied with thin ropes, crushed plastic bottles, and torn bags. The front wheels squeaked with every movement, leaving a crooked, irregular trail on the ground. Henry frowned. People collecting recyclables were not uncommon in Charleston, especially on the outskirts, but this figure was too small to be out on the street alone at this hour, too small to be pushing that weight. He took a few more steps, Apollo in the lead, and the faint light from the lamppost finally revealed what his heart already feared to confirm. It was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 12, maybe younger. Her tangled hair fell over her dirty face, her thin shoulders hunched under the effort, her bare feet dragging across the uneven asphalt. She wore a t-shirt that was far too big, torn at the sides, and faded shorts that must have once had another color, another life. When she noticed the presence of Henry and the dog, the girl froze. Her wide eyes shone for an instant, not with hope, but with panic. She let go of the cart and took 2 steps back, ready to run. But Apollo was faster, not in the sense of chasing, but in the sense of acting. The dog moved forward, walked with firm steps until he was between the girl and the alley's exit. And then, simply, he sat down. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just sat, motionless, blocking the way with a calmness that seemed to say she didn't need to flee, that she was safe here. The girl looked at the dog, then at Henry, then back at the dog. Her breathing was rapid, her chest rising and falling in short, desperate movements. Henry slowly raised his hands, showing his open palms, a universal gesture of peace. "Easy," he said, his voice low and gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk." She didn't answer. She didn't look away, but she didn't say a word either. Henry took another step, observing every detail. The face covered in soot as if she had spent hours near a fire or something burnt. The small hands, but marked with calluses that didn't match her age. And on her arms, visible even under the dirt, were marks he recognized immediately. They weren't from falls. They were from restraints. From something tied too tight for too long. Henry's heart tightened. He had seen this before. Many times. Children who were forced to work, who lived in conditions no one should have to live in, who carried a weight on their shoulders that wasn't theirs. But this girl seemed different. There was something in her eyes, a deep emptiness, a silent acceptance of everything that was happening, as if this were normal, as if there were no other possible reality. "Are you alone?" Henry asked, trying to keep his tone gentle. "Is anyone waiting for you? Somewhere?" Silence. He waited. Apollo remained seated, but now he turned his head toward the girl, as if he too were waiting for an answer. She looked at the dog again, and for the first time, something in her face changed. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity, or perhaps recognition, as if somehow she trusted this animal more than any human being. Henry knelt down, getting on her level, trying to seem less threatening. "That cart was too heavy for you, wasn't it?" he said, more to himself than to her. "Someone asked you to do this." She didn't confirm, but she didn't deny it either. She just kept looking at Apollo. Henry knew there was no point in pushing at that moment. The girl was scared, exhausted, and clearly traumatized. Forcing a conversation would be useless. He needed to act with care, with patience. So he stood up slowly and picked up the radio attached to his belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 304. I need support from Child Protective Services. Location, side street off Kings Avenue, near the Industrial District. Minor at risk, requesting immediate presence." The dispatcher's voice confirmed receipt of the request. Henry put the radio away and looked at the girl again. She hadn't moved. Neither had Apollo. The two seemed frozen in a suspended moment, as if time had stopped in that dark, silent alley. "I'm going to take you to a safe place," Henry said. "You're not going back to whoever put you here, I promise you that." She blinked. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but Henry caught it. There was something there, a spark of recognition, of understanding. Maybe she didn't believe him yet, but some part of her, however small, wanted to. The Child Protective Services team arrived 20 minutes later. Two women got out of a white car, both wearing shirts with the institution's logo. Henry explained the situation, showed them the cart, and pointed to the girl who was now sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall, with Apollo lying beside her. The social workers approached carefully, trying to talk, but they got the same result as Henry. Absolute silence. One of them, a woman with short hair and an experienced gaze, suggested they take the girl to the municipal shelter, where she could take a shower, eat something warm, and rest. But Henry hesitated. There was something about the situation that didn't fit. The silent threat that hung in the air. The way the girl seemed to accept everything without reacting, as if she were conditioned not to expect anything better. "What if she's being looked for?" Henry asked. "If there's someone who wants her back, not to protect her, but to keep using her?" The social worker sighed. "It's possible," she said, "but we can't leave her on the street. She needs a safe place until we can sort out the paperwork, identify who she is if she has a family." Henry looked at Apollo, who now had his head resting on his paws, but his eyes were fixed on the girl. The dog hadn't left her side for a second since they arrived, and the girl, though she didn't speak, seemed calmer near him. "I can take her," Henry said, surprising even himself with his own suggestion. "For a few days until you sort everything out. I have space at home, and Apollo can help." She seems to trust him. The social workers exchanged glances. It wasn't ideal protocol, but there weren't many options at that moment. After a few calls and quick consultations, they agreed. The girl would be under Henry's temporary care with daily follow-ups from CPS until the situation was clarified. On the way home, Henry glanced in the rearview mirror. The girl was sitting in the back seat next to Apollo, who now rested his head on her lap. She didn't pet the dog, but she didn't push him away either. She just accepted his presence, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Henry turned the radio on low, a soft song filling the pre-dawn silence. He thought about everything he would have to face. How this girl had ended up here, who had put her in this situation, and most importantly, how he would help her get out of it. When they arrived at Henry's house, a simple two-story home in the Oakwood Hills neighborhood, he opened the door and turned on the lights. The interior was tidy but without luxuries. Functional furniture, white-painted walls, few decorations. In the corner of the living room was Apollo's bed, a large, soft cushion where the dog usually rested after his shifts. Henry pointed to the couch. "You can sleep here tonight," he said. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." The girl looked at the couch, then at Henry, then at Apollo. Without a word, she sat on the edge of the sofa, her legs drawn up, her arms wrapped around her knees. Henry went to the closet and got a clean blanket, holding it out to her. "If you need anything, just call me. I'll be in the room over there." She took the blanket, but didn't cover herself with it. She just held it, as if testing its texture, its softness, as if she weren't used to such things. Henry went to his room, but left, the door ajar. He knew he wouldn't be able to sleep well, not tonight. He lay on the bed, still in his uniform, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. He thought about the heavy cart, the marks on the girl's arms, the silence that enveloped the whole situation. He thought about how many other children might be out there, invisible, carrying burdens that were not their own. And he thought about Apollo. The dog had scented something on that street, something that went beyond the physical, as if he had sensed the suffering, the loneliness, the abandonment, and he had acted, not with force but with presence, with the calm of one who knew that sometimes the greatest protection you can offer is simply being there. Henry closed his eyes, but sleep didn't come. A few minutes later, he heard a sound from the living room. He got up slowly and went to the door. He peeked through the crack and saw Apollo lying on the floor next to the couch, his head on his paws, his eyes half closed, and the girl, now lying down, with the blanket pulled up to her chin, one hand dangling off the side lightly, touching the dog's fur. Henry felt a lump in his throat. He went back to bed and finally let exhaustion overcome him. The next morning, he woke up early. The sun was already streaming through the window, bringing with it the promised heat of another typical Charleston day. Henry got up, changed his clothes, and went to the living room. The girl was still asleep, her face relaxed for the first time since he'd seen her. Apollo was awake, sitting beside the couch like a tireless guardian. Henry made coffee, toast, and orange juice. He put everything on the kitchen table and waited. A few minutes later, the girl appeared at the doorway, her eyes still swollen with sleep, her hair more tangled than before. She looked at the table, then at Henry. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound natural. "I made breakfast. Help yourself." She hesitated, but the smell of the food seemed to speak louder. She sat down slowly, took a piece of toast, and began to eat, slowly at first, then more quickly, as if she had forgotten what it was like to sit at a table and eat without rushing. Henry watched in silence. He didn't want to pressure her. He knew that trust isn't built with words, but with actions, with time, with patience. After breakfast, he called Child Protective Services, reporting that everything was fine. The social worker said they would come by for a visit in the afternoon to talk with the girl and move forward with the procedures. Henry thanked her and hung up. The rest of the morning passed in silence. The girl stayed in the living room, sitting on the couch, looking out the window. Apollo never left her side. Henry tried to keep himself busy with small household chores, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed to find out who this girl was, where she came from, what had happened to her, and, most importantly, who had put her in that situation. In the afternoon, the social workers arrived. They talked to the girl, or tried to. They asked simple questions. What's your name? How old are you? Do you know where your parents live? Do you remember anything from before? But all they got back was silence. A heavy silence, laden with fear and resignation. One of them, the one with short hair, suggested a temporary name, just to make communication easier while they tried to discover the girl's real identity. How about Olivia? She said, looking at the child with a gentle smile. It's a pretty name. Can I call you that? The girl didn't answer, but she didn't refuse either. And so in that instant, she became Olivia. A temporary name, a borrowed identity, until her real one could be found. The social workers left, promising to return the next day. Henry closed the door and went back to the living room. Olivia was standing near the window looking out at the street. Apollo was beside her as always. Olivia, Henry said, testing the name. Do you like that name? She turned her head slightly but didn't respond. Henry sighed. He knew this would be a long road. But he also knew he couldn't give up. Not on this girl. Not after everything he had seen. That evening Henry made dinner. Rice, beans, grilled chicken, salad. Nothing elaborate, but made with care. Olivia ate in silence, slowly, as if still processing the fact that food was available, that she could eat without fear. After dinner, Henry turned on the television. A light variety show, nothing. Too intense. Olivia sat on the couch, Apollo beside her. Henry sat in the armchair, pretending to watch TV, but actually observing the girl out of the corner of his eye. That's when he noticed. Olivia had her hand resting on Apollo's fur, her fingers moving slowly, as if discovering the texture, the softness, the life that pulsed beneath that golden coat. And Apollo, in turn, was completely relaxed, his head resting on her lap, his eyes closed, as if he knew that this was where he needed to be. Henry felt something shift inside him, a certainty, a conviction. He didn't know how yet, but he knew he would do everything in his power to protect this girl, to give back to her what had been taken away, her childhood, her safety, her hope. And somehow he knew that Apollo felt the same. The night wore on, and Henry suggested that Olivia go to sleep. She obeyed without question, lying down on the couch with the blanket Henry had given her the night before. Apollo once again took up his position as guardian, lying on the floor beside her. Henry turned off the lights and went to his room. But again, sleep was slow to come. His mind was racing, full of questions without answers. Who was Olivia? Where did she come from? Why was she alone, pushing a heavy cart in the middle of the night? And most importantly, who had put her there? He knew he needed to investigate, but he also knew he had to be careful. If there was someone behind this situation, someone who used children for forced labor, then that person wouldn't be happy to know that Olivia was under protection, and that could mean danger for her, for him, for Apollo. But Henry wasn't one to back down, not when a child's life was at stake. He had taken an oath when he put on the uniform, to protect and to serve, and that was exactly what he intended to do. The following days were a period of adjustment. Olivia remained silent, but she slowly began to open up, at least in terms of accepting the household routine. She ate when Henry offered food. She showered when he prepared the bathroom. She slept on the couch, always with Apollo nearby. But she didn't speak. She didn't smile. She showed no emotion, except when she was near the dog. Henry tried to be patient. He knew that deep traumas don't heal overnight, but with each passing day, the urgency to discover the truth grew within him, to understand what had happened, to find those responsible. And so, in this mix of care and investigation, of patience and determination, Henry began to realize that this silent girl, this watchful dog, and he himself were caught in a web much larger than he had imagined. A web that was about to reveal itself thread by thread, secret by secret, until the truth finally came to light. A week had passed since the night Henry found Olivia. 7 days that seemed to carry the weight of entire months. The routine in the Oakwood Hills house had settled into its own delicate rhythm, like a dance where each step had to be carefully measured, not to break the fragile balance that sustained their cohabitation. Henry would wake up early, make coffee, and set the table. Olivia would appear a few minutes later, always in silence, always with Apollo at her heels. She would eat slowly, looking out the window as if searching for something only she could see. After breakfast, Henry would go to work, leaving Olivia in the care of Mrs. Celia, the retired neighbor who had offered to help, a woman with a big heart and experienced hands who understood without needing an explanation that this girl needed space, not questions. At night, when Henry returned, he would find Olivia in the same place, sitting on the couch, Apollo beside her, her eyes fixed on some invisible point on the horizon. He would try to talk, to tell her about his day, to ask simple questions, but the silence persisted. It wasn't an empty silence, however. It was a full silence, heavy with memories that couldn't be spoken, with pains that had no words. But something began to change on the fourth night. Henry had just turned off the living room lights and was heading to his room when he heard a sound from the couch. It wasn't a cry, it wasn't a moan. It was something lower, more contained, an irregular, rapid breathing, as if Olivia were trapped in a nightmare and couldn't get out. He approached slowly, without turning on the light, guided only by the faint glow from the street coming through the window. Olivia was lying down, but her body was tense, her hands clutching the blanket tightly, her eyes closed but her eyelids trembling, as if she were fighting something invisible. Sweat trickled down her forehead, matting the strands of hair that stuck to her skin. Henry was about to reach out to wake her, but before he could, Apollo acted. The dog, who was sleeping on the floor next to the couch, got up silently. He carefully climbed onto the sofa, lay down next to Olivia, and rested his snout on her shoulder in a gesture so delicate it seemed almost human. And then he began to gently lick the girl's face in a soft rhythm, as if telling her it was okay, that she wasn't alone, that she could wake up without fear. Olivia's eyes opened. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, lost between sleep and wakefulness. But when she saw Apollo there, so close, so present, something changed. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But she slowly raised her hand and placed it on the dog's head, her fingers sinking into his soft fur. And she stayed like that, motionless, breathing deeply, until her body finally relaxed. Henry backed away slowly, returning to his room, but he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what he had seen, about the nightmares Olivia carried, about the marks the past had left on her, and more than ever, he felt the need to uncover the truth. The next day, Henry requested a day off from work. He told his captain he needed to handle personal matters, and although he received a suspicious look, he got the authorization. He left the house early, before Olivia woke up, leaving a note for Mrs. Celia saying he'd be back in the afternoon. Apollo went with him. Henry had a plan, and he needed the dog's nose to execute it. They returned to where it all began, the side street off Kings Avenue, near the industrial district. The cart was still there, leaning against a wall, abandoned. Henry got out of the patrol car and unclipped Apollo's leash. The dog immediately began to sniff the ground, the cart, the cardboard boxes still piled in the corner. Henry watched attentively, following his every move. Apollo stopped near one of the cart's wheels, sniffed intensely, and then lifted his head, looking at Henry. He had found something. Henry approached, crouched down, and examined the spot. There was a mark on the ground, almost imperceptible, as if something heavy had been dragged there repeatedly. And near the mark, stuck between the uneven stones of the sidewalk, was a piece of fabric. It was small, torn, and faded. Henry carefully picked it up and stored it in a plastic bag he had brought. Apollo continued sniffing, now following an invisible trail that only he could perceive. Henry followed him, crossing the street, turning corners, passing through narrow alleys. With each step, he felt they were moving away from known civilization and entering a part of Charleston that few people saw, where the houses were more precarious, where asphalt gave way to dirt roads, where the silence had a different weight. Apollo stopped in front of a vacant lot. A large area, surrounded by a rusty, hole-filled fence, with faded signs announcing a development that never broke ground. In the background, the abandoned structure of an industrial warehouse was visible, with exposed brick walls and glassless windows, just black holes that seemed like empty eyes watching anyone who approached. Henry felt a shiver run up his spine. Something was wrong with this place, something beyond the physical decay. It was as if the air carried bad memories, echoes of things that shouldn't have happened. Apollo growled softly. It wasn't an aggressive growl, but one of alert. Henry placed his hand on the gun in his holster, more out of instinct than real need, and approached the fence. He found an opening, a hole large enough for a person to pass through. He hesitated for a second, but determination won out. He went in, with Apollo leading the way. The inside of the lot was a mix of destruction and neglect. Debris scattered about, tall weeds growing between the rubble, remnants of extinguished fires. Henry walked slowly, attentive to every detail. That's when he saw it. Near the warehouse, half hidden by the vegetation, were objects that didn't belong in this scene of abandonment. Old mattresses, torn and dirty, piled irregularly, thin ropes tied to iron pillars with knots that indicated recent use. Empty food wrappers, some still with leftovers, attracting flies. And in the corner, almost invisible among the rubble, a piece of fabric identical to the one Henry had found by the cart. Henry's stomach churned. This wasn't just an abandoned place. It was a place where people had lived. Children, probably. Children like Olivia, and not by choice. He took out his phone and started taking pictures of everything, every detail, every object, every piece of evidence. He knew he would need this later. Apollo continued sniffing, now more agitated, moving among the mattresses, as if following scent trails that told stories Henry could only imagine. It was while putting his phone away that Henry heard a noise, a metallic creak coming from the back of the warehouse. He froze. Apollo also stopped, his ears pricked, his body tense. Henry signaled for the dog to stay quiet and walked slowly toward the sound. Behind the warehouse, he found a metal door ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. He pushed it open carefully, entering what seemed to have been a storage room. The smell was strong, a mixture of mold, urine, and something chemical he couldn't identify. The walls were covered in graffiti, childish drawings made with charcoal or chalk, figures of houses, trees, people holding hands, dreams drawn by those who had been prevented from living them. Henry felt a lump in his throat. He left the storage room, returned to the outer lot, and took a deep breath. He needed to get out of there. He needed to process everything he had seen. But more importantly, he needed to understand how it all connected to Olivia. When he arrived home, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. Mrs. Celia was in the living room, crocheting while Olivia drew something on a piece of paper, sitting on the floor with Apollo lying beside her. The neighbor stood up when she saw Henry. "She's been quiet all day," Mrs. Celia said in a low voice. "Ate well, didn't cause any trouble. But every now and then she stares out the window as if she's waiting for someone." Henry thanked her and said goodbye to his neighbor. When he was alone with Olivia, he approached slowly and sat on the floor, on the other side of the paper. The girl didn't look up, but she didn't stop drawing either. Henry watched. It was a simple figure, made with uncertain lines, a small child, holding hands with a dog. In the background, what looked like a house, or maybe a warehouse. Henry wasn't sure. "You draw well," he said, trying to sound natural. "Can I see?" Olivia paused for a moment, but didn't hand over the paper. She just continued drawing, now adding more details, bars on the windows, stacked boxes. And, in the corner, a larger figure, faceless, just a shadow. Henry felt a chill run through his body. This drawing wasn't a product of imagination. It was a memory. Olivia was showing him something, something she had lived through, something that haunted her. "Olivia," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "did you live in a place like the one in this drawing?" She stopped drawing. She didn't answer, but her body tensed, her shoulders rising slightly in a defensive posture. Henry realized he had touched a sensitive nerve. He needed to back off, but he also needed to know. "You don't have to be afraid," he continued. "That place, wherever it is, you're not going back there, I promise." Olivia dropped the pencil. For a long moment, she remained motionless. Then, slowly, very slowly, she lifted her head and looked directly at Henry. It was the first time she had done that. Her eyes were moist, but there were no tears. There was just a frightening depth, as if she carried a weight inside her that no child should ever have to bear. Henry extended his hand slowly, without forcing it. Olivia looked at his hand, then at him, then at Apollo, who lifted his head and sniffed lightly, as if encouraging her. And then, in a gesture that made Henry's heart ache, Olivia placed her small, thin hand on his. She didn't squeeze. She didn't hold on. She just left it there, as if she were testing, feeling, trying to understand if she could trust him. Henry didn't move, he didn't say anything, he just sat there hand in hand with this girl who had been invisible to the world, but who now in this simple living room in an Oakwood Hills house was being seen, was being heard, even in the silence, was being welcomed. That night, Henry didn't sleep. He sat on his bed looking at the photos he had taken at the vacant lot. He zoomed in on each image, studied every detail. The mattresses, the ropes, the food wrappers, the drawings on the walls. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. There was a scheme operating in Charleston, a scheme that used children, and Olivia had been a part of it. But who was behind it? Who organized it? Who profited from it? And most importantly, how many other children were still trapped in that system? Henry knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. But he also knew he had to be careful. If powerful people were involved, reporting it the wrong way could jeopardize everything and put Olivia at risk. The next day, Henry sought out Marion, a colleague he trusted. A police officer for 7 years, with experience in investigating crimes against children, Marion had a reputation for being incorruptible and competent. Henry showed her the photos, told her about Olivia, about the vacant lot, about everything he had discovered. Marion listened in silence, her face growing more serious by the minute. When Henry finished, she took a deep breath. "This is bigger than you think, Henry," she said. "I've heard rumors, children disappearing from the outskirts, no records, no official reports, as if they were invisible. But we've never been able to find concrete proof. If what you found is real, we could be talking about a network." Henry felt a weight in his chest. A network. The word had a threatening heaviness. It meant organization. It meant people working together. It meant power. And power was dangerous. "What do I do?" he asked. Marion thought for a moment. "First, protect the girl. She's the key witness, even without speaking. Second, gather all the evidence you can, but discreetly. Don't raise suspicion. Third, let me make some internal inquiries. I'll see if I can find information on similar cold cases. And fourth, don't do anything alone. If this is what I think it is, you're going to need backup." Henry agreed. He knew Marion was right. But he also knew that every day that passed was another day that other children could be suffering, and that ate at him from the inside. When he returned home that evening, he found Olivia sitting on the couch, but this time with something different in her hands. It was an old notebook Henry had left in a drawer, along with some colored pencils. Olivia was drawing again, and this time the drawings were more detailed. Henry approached slowly. He sat beside her, without invading her space, just observing. Olivia had drawn several children, all small, all holding hands, forming a line. At the front of the line, a faceless shadow, and behind the children a cart. Several carts, in fact, each one being pushed by a different child. Henry felt his blood boil. This was a silent confession. Olivia was showing him what she had lived through. And it wasn't just her, there were others, many others. "How many, Olivia?" he asked, knowing he wouldn't get a verbal answer. "How many children were with you?" Olivia stopped drawing. She looked at the paper. Then she picked up a red pencil and began to make small dots around the figures. 1, 2, 3, 4. Henry counted. 10 dots in total, 10 children. Henry closed his eyes. 10 lives, 10 stolen childhoods, 10 stories that needed to be told. "Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Where are those children now? Do you know?" Olivia didn't answer, but she pointed to the drawing, to the warehouse, to the bars, to the faceless shadow. Henry understood. They were still there, or at least they had been until recently, and if Olivia had managed to get out, maybe the others could too. That night, after Olivia fell asleep, Henry picked up his phone and called Marion. He told her about the drawings, about the 10 dots, about everything. Marion listened in silence, and at the end she said only one thing: "I'll be there tomorrow. We need to act fast." Henry hung up and stared into the dark living room where Olivia slept on the couch with Apollo beside her. He knew the next few days would be decisive. He knew he was about to enter a battle that was beyond his individual capacity. But he also knew he had no choice. Because when you look into the eyes of a child who has had everything taken from her, when you see the screaming silence of someone who has been forced to accept the unacceptable, there is no way to turn your back. There is no way to pretend you didn't see. There is no way to move on without doing anything. And Henry, with all his experience, with his uniform, with his sense of justice, knew that this was the most important fight of his life. It wasn't just about Olivia. It was about all the invisible children who were still out there, waiting for someone to see them, waiting for someone to save them, waiting for someone to tell them they mattered, and he would be that someone, whatever it took. Marion arrived the next morning, punctually at 8 o'clock. Henry greeted her at the door, still in slippers and a t-shirt, his eyes marked by a lack of sleep. She entered carrying a brown folder under her arm, and the weight of someone who knew this visit was more than just protocol. "Where's the girl?" she asked in a low voice, looking around. "Still sleeping," Henry replied, gesturing to the couch where Olivia was curled up in the blanket, with Apollo lying on the floor beside her, his eyes open and alert to the stranger's presence. Marion approached slowly, observing. Olivia was sleeping on her side, her face partially hidden by strands of hair, one hand clutching the edge of the blanket tightly, as if even in sleep she needed to hold on to something. It was an image that spoke more than 1,000 words. "She's so small," Marion murmured, almost to herself. How could anyone do this to a child? Henry didn't answer. There was no answer that would make sense. He just led Marion to the kitchen where he made coffee while she opened the folder on the table. "I spent the night investigating," Marion said, pulling out some printed sheets. "I looked into cold cases from the last 2 years, cases of missing children or children found in suspicious circumstances in the outskirts of Charleston. I found 7 records, all with the same pattern. Minors between 8 and 12 years old, with no documents, no known family, found on the streets pushing carts or collecting recyclables. In every case, the children were sent to municipal shelters, and in every case they disappeared a few days later." Henry's stomach churned. "Disappeared? What do you mean?" Marion sighed. "They ran away, according to the reports. But that's the problem. How does an institutionalized child run away from a shelter without a trace, without being seen, without setting off any alarms, and always within the same time frame, between 2 and 4 days after arrival? It's too convenient. Way too convenient." Henry gripped his coffee mug tightly. "You think someone took them out of there? From inside the shelters?" Marion looked at him with a grave expression. "I think someone has access, information, maybe even people working on the inside. Think about it. If you have a scheme that depends on invisible child labor, you can't let those children stay where they can be identified, where they can talk, where they can be tracked. You have to get them back before that happens." Henry ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of this revelation. "And Olivia? Why didn't she disappear? Why is she still here?" "Because you didn't take her to a shelter," Marion replied. "You kept her under your personal care. Whoever is behind this didn't expect that variable. But Henry, that also means you're a problem, and problems need to be dealt with." Henry glanced toward the living room where Olivia was still sleeping. The threat he had received in the first week came back to his mind. The note under the door. The handwritten words. "If you keep the girl, you'll regret it." It wasn't an empty warning, it was a promise. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice tense. Marion placed her hand on his. You do exactly what you've been doing. Protect the girl. But you need to be smart. You need a plan. And you need protection. I'm going to talk to the captain, but discreetly. I'll ask them to increase patrols on your street. I'll also reach out to contacts in the district attorney's office. If we can build a solid case, we can shut this down for good. And the other children? Henry asked. The ones still out there. How long will it take to find them? Marion looked down. That's the hard part. Without an exact location, without witnesses, without formal reports, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. But Olivia could be the key. If she can communicate, if she can give us more information, we can speed things up. Henry knew Marion was right, but he also knew that forcing Olivia to talk would be counterproductive. The girl needed time. She needed to feel safe. She needed to learn to trust again. And that didn't happen overnight. Marion stayed for another hour, reviewing the drawings Olivia had made, taking photos of the evidence Henry had collected at the vacant lot, and outlining a preliminary profile of the situation. When she left, she promised to return in 2 days with more information. Henry closed the door and went back to the living room. Olivia was awake, sitting on the couch with Apollo beside her. She looked at him with those deep, questioning eyes. Henry approached and sat down next to her. That was a friend, he said. She's helping us. You don't have to be afraid. Olivia didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Henry decided to try a different approach. He took the sketchbook and placed it on the coffee table. Olivia, I know you don't want to talk, and that's okay. But if you can show me more things through your drawings, it will help a lot. Not just you, but other children, who might be going through what you went through. Olivia looked at the sketchbook. Then she looked at Apollo as if seeking confirmation. The dog sniffed lightly, his tail thumping slowly on the couch. It was as if he was saying it was okay, that she could trust him. Then Olivia took the sketchbook. She opened it to a blank page. She picked up a pencil, and she began to draw. Henry watched in silence. She drew a map, or at least something that looked like a map. Lines representing streets, squares representing buildings, and in the center a large circle with bars around it. The warehouse, probably. Olivia then drew arrows coming out of the circle, each leading to a smaller square, and inside each square a number, 2, 3, 1, 4. Henry frowned. What were those numbers? He tried to interpret them. Maybe they were quantities, the number of children at each location, or maybe they were codes, identifiers. He wasn't sure. Olivia, these numbers, what do they mean? He asked. Olivia stopped drawing. She looked at the paper. Then she pointed to one of the squares with the number 3. She took another pencil, a blue one, this time, and drew 3 small figures inside the square. Children. Henry understood. They were locations where the children were distributed. Houses, or maybe work sites. Places where they were forced to do things. Things that children shouldn't do. Olivia, do you know where these places are? He asked, pointing to the squares. She shook her head no. Then she pointed to the central circle, the warehouse, and made a gesture with her hands as if she were being taken, transported. Henry understood. She knew there were other places, but she didn't know exactly where they were. She was taken, from one place to another, always blindfolded or in a way that she couldn't memorize the route. It was a smart strategy. Cruel, but smart. To keep the children disoriented, without reference points, unable to escape or report. Henry took a picture of the drawing. Every detail could be important. Then he took another pencil and drew a large, faceless figure next to the warehouse, the shadow that Olivia always drew. Who is this person? He asked. Olivia looked at the drawing. Her body tensed, her shoulders rose, her breathing quickened. Apollo immediately moved closer, resting his snout on her hand in a comforting gesture. Olivia stroked the dog slowly, as if calming herself. Then, without a word, she picked up the red pencil, and she scribbled over the shadow with force, once, twice, 3 times, until the figure was covered in intense, angry red lines. Henry felt a chill down his spine. This wasn't just a person. This was someone who caused fear, someone who caused pain, someone Olivia wanted to erase from her memory, but couldn't. "Olivia, is this the boss?" Henry asked, his voice gentle. Olivia neither confirmed nor denied. She just dropped the pencil and moved away from the sketchbook, as if she didn't want to look at it anymore. Henry didn't press. He knew he had reached the limit of what she could handle at that moment. The following days were a tense wait. Henry continued to work, but always with his phone nearby, always alert for any message from Marion. Mrs. Celia continued to look after Olivia during the day, and the girl gradually began to open up to the neighbor. Not with words, but with small gestures. She would accept a cookie. She would help fold laundry. She would sit beside her while they watched television. They were small but significant steps forward. At night, Henry and Olivia established a routine. They ate dinner together in comfortable silence. Afterward, Henry would turn on the television, some light program, and Olivia would draw while Apollo slept beside her. Every now and then she would show the drawings to Henry. Some were of places, others of people, others of feelings, fear, sadness, but also, slowly, hope. She started drawing Henry's house, the couch, Apollo, Mrs. Celia, as if she were creating a new memory, a good one, to replace the bad ones. It was on one of these nights that Olivia did something unexpected. Henry was sitting in the armchair, flipping through a book, when he felt something touch his arm. It was Olivia's hand. She was standing next to the armchair, looking at him with those large, deep eyes. She said nothing. She just stood there. Henry understood. She needed closeness. She needed to feel she wasn't alone. He opened his arm, creating a space on the couch next to him. Olivia sat down, still in silence, but leaning against him. And they stayed like that for long minutes, just sharing the silence, the warmth, the presence. Apollo came closer, lay down at their feet and let out a long, contented sigh, as if he knew that, in that moment, they were a family. Unconventional, unplanned, but real. 3 days later, Marion returned, this time with concrete news. Henry met her in the kitchen while Olivia was in her room with Apollo, resting. "I got something," Marion said, opening the folder. "I located an informant, a young man who worked as a guard at a warehouse in the industrial region 2 years ago. He quit because he couldn't stand what he saw, children being used for heavy labor. He said the scheme is controlled by a figure known as Dr. Silver. He's not a doctor, it's just a nickname. No one knows his real name, but he has connections, politicians, businessmen, even people inside public institutions. That's why they've never been caught." Henry felt anger boiling inside him. "And what can we do?" Marion took a deep breath. "I'm putting together a dossier with everything you've collected, Olivia's drawings, the informant's testimony, the cold cases. I'm taking it to the district attorney. If we're lucky, we can get an operation authorized. But I need one more thing. I need Olivia to identify a place, a face, something that connects everything definitively." Henry shook his head. "She's not ready. I can't force her." Marion placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, and I'm not asking you to force her, but think about it. The longer we wait, the more children will suffer. If Olivia can give us one more piece of the puzzle, we can save not only her, but all the others." Henry knew Marion was right, but he also knew he couldn't put Olivia at emotional risk. It was a dilemma with no easy answer. That night after Marion left, Henry sat in the living room thinking. Olivia appeared at the bedroom door with Apollo at her side. She looked at him, and Henry saw something different in her eyes. Determination. Olivia approached, took the sketchbook and opened it to a blank page. She began to draw quickly, as if she had made a decision. Henry watched. She drew a face. This time it wasn't a featureless shadow. It was a face with eyes, a nose, a mouth, a light beard, a scar on the forehead, a baseball cap. Henry's heart raced. "Do you remember his face?" he asked. Olivia nodded yes. Then she drew a car next to it, a large car like a van, and inside the van, several children sitting, huddled together. Henry immediately took a picture. This was gold, a face, a vehicle, concrete information that could be investigated. "Olivia, you are so brave," he said. his voice thick with emotion. So very brave. For the first time since he had met her, Olivia managed something like a smile. It wasn't a full smile, not a happy one, but it was the smile of someone who was beginning to believe that things could change, that she could change, that the world could be different. Henry sent the photos to Marion immediately. The reply came a few minutes later. "This is perfect. I'll pass it to the identification team. If this guy has a record, we'll find him." And they did. 2 days later, Marion called. "We got him. Luis Ferdinand Braga, known as Chico, has a record for various petty crimes, works as a freelance driver, but is suspected of involvement in suspicious activities. We managed to track the van, it's registered in his name, and we've located where. He usually parks it, at a mechanic's shop on the north side of Charleston." Henry felt the adrenaline surge. "So we can get him?" "We can, but we need a warrant, and for that, I need to close the dossier. I'm almost there. Another 2 days and I'll hand everything to the DA. Henry hung up and looked at Olivia, who was drawing on the couch. The girl who had been invisible was about to become the key to dismantling an entire operation. And all because a dog had sensed something wrong on a random night. All because Henry decided not to turn his back. All because Olivia found the strength to show what she had lived through. That night Henry barely slept. He knew he was close. Close to getting justice. Close to saving other children. Close to giving Olivia the chance to have a real life. But he also knew the danger hadn't passed. That powerful people were involved. That the fight was just beginning. And as he looked out his bedroom window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Henry made a silent promise to Olivia, to Apollo, to all the children who were still out, there waiting for someone to see them. He wouldn't stop. No matter the cost, no matter the risk, he would see this through to the end. The raid happened on a Tuesday before dawn. Henry didn't participate directly, as he was off duty and not technically part of the assigned team, but Marion kept him informed minute by minute through quick, direct text messages. The tension was palpable even through the phone screen. At 5:20 a.m., the message Henry had been waiting for finally arrived. "We got him. Chico is in custody. We found the van. Inside, documents, lists, addresses. There's a lot of material. Henry, this is much bigger than we imagined." Henry closed his eyes and took a deep breath. One part of the battle was won, but he knew it was just the beginning. He looked at the living room couch, where Olivia was sleeping peacefully with Apollo curled at her feet. The girl didn't know it yet, but that morning would mark the start of a new chapter, a chapter where she would no longer be just an invisible victim, but a survivor who helped change the story for many others. When Olivia woke up, Henry was making breakfast. She entered the kitchen still sleepy, her hair disheveled, and for the first time since she had arrived, she mumbled a good morning so quiet that Henry almost didn't hear it. But he did, and he felt his heart swell with emotion. "Good morning, Olivia," he replied, trying to contain his own surprise and joy. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded yes, sat at the table and picked up a piece of toast. Apollo came over, resting his snout on her lap, and Olivia ran her hand through the dog's fur with an affection that was becoming more natural each day. After breakfast, Henry sat next to Olivia in the living room. He knew he had to tell her what had happened, but in a way that wouldn't frighten her, that wouldn't bring back the ghosts she was just beginning to leave behind. "Olivia, I need to tell you something," he began, his voice calm and steady. "Remember those drawings you made? The man with the van, the children, the warehouse." Olivia stopped petting Apollo and looked at Henry, her eyes wide, a flash of fear crossing her face. "It's okay," Henry said, placing his hand on hers. "It's nothing bad, it's good, very good. Thanks to your drawings, the police were able to find the man who hurt you. He's been arrested. He won't be able to harm you or any other children ever again." Olivia blinked, processing the information. Then, slowly, very slowly, her eyes began to fill with tears. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of liberation, of something she had held inside for so long that could now, finally, be released. Henry pulled her into a hug. Olivia didn't resist. She let herself be enveloped in his arms, buried her, face in his shoulder and cried. She cried for everything she hadn't cried for since he found her on that dark street. She cried for the pain, the fear, the loneliness. But she also cried with hope, with gratitude, with rebirth. Apollo moved closer, resting his head on both their laps as if wanting to be part of that moment, of that healing. When the tears finally subsided, Olivia pulled back a little and looked at Henry. For the first time, her eyes weren't empty. They were full of life. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse from so much accumulated silence. "Thank you for seeing me." Henry felt a lump in his throat so tight he could barely respond. But he managed. "I will always see you, Olivia. Always." In the weeks that followed, life in Charleston changed irrevocably. The operation that began with Chico's arrest unfolded into a larger investigation involving the district attorney's office, the FBI, and various child protection agencies. The material found in the van led to other addresses, other accomplices, other victims. 7 children were rescued from different locations scattered across the outskirts of Charleston, all with stories similar to Olivia's, all invisible, all forgotten, but now seen, welcomed, protected. The man known as Dr. Silva was never captured. The investigation pointed to an influential figure with political and business connections, but the concrete evidence was slippery, always leading to intermediaries who wouldn't talk, or to documents that conveniently disappeared. Marion explained to Henry that this was common in cases involving power and money. The roots ran deep, and pulling them all out would take time, perhaps years. But something had changed. The invisibility was broken, the silence was shattered, and every rescued child was a victory against a system that fed on vulnerability and neglect. Olivia slowly began to open up. She started attending therapy sessions with a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma. She started going to school, a public school near Henry's house. She had difficulties, of course. Years of lost education, of interrupted socialization, couldn't be recovered overnight. But she had something many children in similar situations didn't. She had support. She had Henry. She had Apollo. She had Mrs. Celia, who became a surrogate grandmother, always present, always caring. She had Marion, who visited regularly to follow up on the case and who developed a genuine affection for the girl. And most importantly, Olivia had herself. The strength that had allowed her to survive everything she had been through was now being channeled into rebuilding, into growing, into living. 3 months after her rescue, Henry received a call from Child Protective Services. They had managed to track down Olivia's biological family, or at least what was left of it. Her mother had passed away years ago from health complications that were never properly treated. Her father was unknown, but there was an aunt, her mother's sister, who lived in Somerville, a town near Charleston. She had never known of Olivia's existence, as the family had been estranged for many years, but upon being informed, she expressed interest in meeting her niece. Henry's heart tightened. He knew this moment would come. Olivia had family, blood relatives, and as much as he had become a father figure to her, he knew that legally, emotionally, the girl had the right to know her roots, to have the chance to reconnect with her true history. He talked to Olivia about it on a Saturday afternoon, sitting on the living room couch with Apollo lying at their feet as always. "Olivia, you have an aunt. She lives in Somerville and wants to meet you. If you want, we can go there. Meet her, see how you feel." Olivia was silent for a long time. Then she asked, her voice still fragile but growing firmer, "And you? Will you come with me?" Henry smiled. "Of course I will. I'll be with you whenever you need me." The meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon in a quiet park in Somerville. Olivia's aunt, a woman in her early 40s named Regina, was a public school teacher with kind eyes and a nervous smile. When saw Olivia, her eyes filled with tears. "You look just like your mother," Regina said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just like her." Olivia looked at her aunt, then at Henry, then back at Regina. Henry placed a hand on the girl's shoulder in a gesture of encouragement. Olivia took a deep breath and took a step forward. "Hi," she said, still shy. Regina knelt down, getting to Olivia's level. "Hi, my beautiful girl. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. But now that I have, I want to be a part of your life if you'll let me." Olivia looked at Henry again. He nodded encouragingly. Then Olivia looked at Regina and said, "I'd like that." The following weeks were a period of transition. Regina visited Charleston regularly, spending time with Olivia, getting to know Henry and Apollo, understanding the dynamic that had formed. It was clear that Regina loved her niece and wanted what was best for her, but she also understood that abruptly pulling her from the environment where she had found safety would be detrimental. Together, Henry, Regina, and the CPS team worked out a plan. Olivia would continue to live with Henry, who would begin the process for legal guardianship. Regina would be a constant presence, a bridge to the family history Olivia never had a chance to know. On weekends, Olivia would visit Somerville, stay at Regina's house, meet cousins, and learn about her mother's story through photos and stories Regina had lovingly preserved. It was an imperfect solution, but it was the best one possible. And surprisingly, it worked. Olivia blossomed. She began to talk more, to smile more, to participate in school activities. She made friends. She started to enjoy drawing not just painful memories, but also dreams, hopes, and her future. Apollo remained her faithful guardian. He walked with her to school every morning, waited at the gate until classes were over, and walked home with her. Henry had to arrange special training and get authorization for Apollo to accompany Olivia as an emotional support animal. And the dog, as always, carried out his mission with a dedication that went beyond training. It was love, pure and simple. A year after the rescue, Henry and Olivia were sitting in the backyard of their house on a mild, sunny afternoon. Apollo was chasing a ball that Olivia threw, his tongue hanging out, his tail wagging non-stop. Olivia was laughing, a free, genuine laugh of a child who had the right to be a child. Henry watched, his heart full. He thought about everything that had happened. The night he found Olivia, the fear in her eyes, the heavy silence that surrounded her. And he thought about how everything had changed, not just for her, but for him too. Henry had entered this story as a police officer doing his duty, but he came out of it as a father, not on paper, not yet legally, but in his heart, in his commitment, in his love. Olivia ran to him and jumped into his lap, still laughing, her hair flying in the wind. Apollo followed right behind, jumping and barking with joy. "I love you, Henry," Olivia said, hugging him tightly. Henry felt tears well up, but he didn't hold them back. "I love you too, Olivia. So much." And in that moment, under the Charleston sun, in a simple house in Oakwood Hills, with a dog running around and a girl laughing in his lap, Henry understood the true meaning of family. It wasn't about blood, it wasn't about documents, it was about choice, about presence, about loving even when it was hard, about protecting even when it was dangerous, about seeing even when the whole world pretended not to. The investigation into the exploitation network continued. Marion led several subsequent operations, always with Henry's support behind the scenes. Other children were found, other families were rebuilt, other stories were rewritten. Not all of them had happy endings. Some children never fully recovered from their trauma. Some families were never found, but every life saved was a victory. Every child who smiled again was a reason to keep fighting. Olivia, for her part, became a kind of symbol, not publicly as her identity was always protected, but within the institutions that worked with at-risk children. She was proof that recovery was possible, that love could heal, that no child was too invisible to be saved. 5 years later, Olivia was 14. She attended a public school, got good grades, had friends, and was part of a drama club. Apollo, now a bit older, with a few white hairs appearing on his snout, remained her inseparable companion. Regina visited every month, and Olivia spent holidays in Somerville, where she had developed a strong bond with her cousins and with the story of the mother she never knew. Henry, now Olivia's official adoptive father, had been promoted to lieutenant. He continued to work for the police department, but now he also gave talks on child protection, on the importance of seeing the invisible. on how a single act of care can change the course of an entire life. And Apollo, the dog who had sensed something wrong on a random night, had retired from active duty but gained a new purpose. He was visited by children in psychological treatment, served as a therapy dog in shelters, and brought comfort to those who needed it. His legacy went far beyond police operations. It was a legacy of love. One December evening, Christmas Eve, Henry, Olivia, and Apollo were sitting on the front porch of their house, watching the Christmas lights that Mrs. Celia had insisted on hanging all down the street. Olivia was lying in Henry's lap, her bare feet up, with Apollo lying beside them, his head resting on her leg. "You know, Henry," Olivia said, her voice soft, "sometimes I still have nightmares, I still remember bad things, but then I wake up and I see you. I see Apollo, I see that I'm home, and then everything is okay." Henry stroked her hair. "You're the strongest person I know, Olivia. Stronger than any police officer, any hero, because you went through terrible things and chose not to let them define who you are." Olivia was silent for a moment. Then she said, "I chose because you showed me I could choose. Before you, I didn't think I had a choice. I thought my life was just that. But you showed me I could have another life, a real life," Henry felt. His heart tightened with emotion. "It wasn't just me, it was Apollo too, it was you, it was a lot of people." Olivia smiled. "Yeah, it was a lot of people. But it started with you, and with him." Apollo lifted his head, as if he knew they were talking about him, and let out a soft bark, almost as if in agreement. They laughed together, and they stayed there, under the Charleston stars, under the Christmas lights, under the peace of a family that was built, not by chance, but by the conscious choice not to turn away, not to ignore, not to pretend they didn't see. Olivia grew up. She became a social worker, helping at-risk children. She never forgot where she came from, but she also never let it be her sole definition. She was a survivor, yes, but she was also a dreamer, a fighter, a woman who used her story to help others rewrite theirs. Henry grew old beside her, with a father's pride, with the gratitude of having been chosen to be part of her journey. Apollo lived to be 15, surrounded by love, affection, and purpose. When he passed, it was on a quiet afternoon, lying on the living room couch, his head in Olivia's lap as she stroked his fur and whispered words of gratitude and farewell. It was a painful departure, but also one full of peace, because Apollo had fulfilled his mission. He had saved a life, and in saving one life, he had changed many others. The story of Henry, Olivia, and Apollo didn't end with a perfect fairy tale ending. It ended with something much more valuable. It ended with the certainty that love, when it is true, transforms. That courage, when it is genuine, saves. That no child is too invisible, no pain is too great, and no hope is too small. It ended with the certainty that sometimes all it takes is for one person to care, for one dog to sense something wrong, for one girl to find the strength to show what she lived through. All it takes is one random night on a dark street in Charleston, where 3 lives intersected and decided together to rewrite fate. And that certainty, more than any trophy, more than any recognition, was the greatest gift that journey left behind. The certainty that it's worth it. It's always worth it.